Welcome to the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. I'm your host, Larry Witzel. If God is giving you big dreams for growing his kingdom, then this podcast is for you. Our goal is to offer practical training for effective evangelism in the Seventh-day Adventist ministry context, but we know that the principles that we talk about here are applicable in many other churches as well. So wherever you're doing ministry, welcome to the Propel Podcast. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please check out our new Propel Conference YouTube channel. We post all the latest podcast episodes along with video recordings of the presentations, and it would really help us if you could take 10 seconds to subscribe. It's an easy way you can show support for our mission to propel church growth. You can find us at youtube.com/@propelconference. That's youtube.com/@propelconference. Our special guest for this episode is Dr. Hiram Rester, pastor of the Boonville and Columbia Seventh-day Adventist churches in Missouri. For nearly 3 decades, Hiram has faithfully served as a pastor, a church planter, and an evangelist. And during his ministry, Hiram has conducted over 100 full-message evangelistic campaigns, giving him keen insight into this particular evangelistic method. He recently earned a Doctor of Ministry from Andrews University, specializing in church growth and multiplication. And his dissertation has actually been particularly impactful for me at Sermon View as we look at ways to use short-form videos for evangelism. Well, in this presentation, Dr. Hiram Rester uses grafting fruit trees as a metaphor for evangelism. He highlights the importance of starting with proven series and tools, using public halls to reach more people, and delivering a full message series. He stresses the importance of guests reading the Bible and making personal decisions. And he encourages pastors to prioritize evangelism and call for decisions during their presentations. This talk is just packed full of great information, whether you're new to proclamational evangelism or a seasoned expert. And I know that you're going to be blessed. Before we get to the presentation, though, I want to highlight the sponsor of this episode, E13. Their mission is to provide churches with the best tools for membership and church management. Since 2003, E13 has helped Seventh-day Adventist churches, conferences, and unions maintain membership records and serve their communities effectively. Churches benefit from solutions that streamline member records and communications, and conferences can access detailed member records and insightful statistics. To learn more, visit eAdventist today at eadventist.net and discover how they can support your church's growth and vitality. Okay, let's turn to Dr. Hiram Rester's talk in the Public Evangelism Breakout Track of the 2024 Propel Conference. His topic, Proven Tools for Effective Evangelism.
Anytime we start something new, it can be a challenge. I took on a new hobby a couple of years ago. It started when we bought some country property and planted trees, and it's part of probably what has made me being focused on outreach and being an evangelist. I always feel like anything worth doing is worth doing to excess. I don't know if any of y'all relate to that. And so I decided to plant some fruit trees on our 6 acres. And so by the end of the year, I had put 180 fruit and nut trees in the ground. It just seemed like a good thing to do. And then one of the ways I was able to afford those, if you get good grafted fruit trees ready to go on the ground, they might cost $60, but you get what's called rootstock for $4.50 each. That's my price range. And so I put the rootstock in the ground and let it get started growing. And then I had to figure out how to put good cultivars, good varieties on top of that rootstock, and that's called grafting. Now, if you're a Bible student, you're familiar with grafting somewhat. The book of Romans talks about the ancient Israel being broken off and us being grafted in, right? And so the Bible talks about grafting. So I started watching YouTube videos, and I tried a little bit of grafting, and some of the grafts took, and some died. The trees didn't die, though. They just, grew back from the roots, and so I was going to get to try again. And so I watched some more videos. I got me a grafting knife instead of just a normal knife. Turned out it wasn't a great grafting knife, and I managed to cut my thumb horribly bad. But I kept trying, and I took this one pear tree and I cut it back. This I did about a month and a half ago. Maybe actually probably like my old picture right there. That's a pear tree that was already growing on the property when I bought it. And I cut it back, and you see all those pieces of wire and little tags hanging there, and I did 22 grafts. On that one pear tree, I now have 22 different varieties of pear. And in my journey of learning how to graft, oh brother, I mean, we're going to get sound like this. Okay. I feel way too Pentecostal when I have to walk around with a handheld microphone. But let's get that turned down if we could. So I put 22 varieties. I had 30 pear trees in the ground, and I ordered these little sticks off the internet called scions to graft on there, and they're different kinds of pear. And then I had all these little pieces left over, so I put them all on this tree, and when I went and had a look at it Sabbath afternoon, all 22 grafts are growing. 22 for 22. The point is you can start at something and not be very good at it, and over time get much better. Evangelism is the same way. Evangelism, you've got to do it. That's one of the biggest things. And I realize there's a lot of criticism about evangelism today, and I'm a critic of it too at times. But I remember this quote. I wanted to share it with you from D.L. Moody. He said, "It's clear you don't like my way of doing evangelism. You raised some good points. Frankly, sometimes I do not like my way of doing evangelism. But I like my way of doing it better than your way of not doing it." That's what I'm going to share with you today. I don't expect you to like everything I'm going to share. In fact, I don't expect you to agree on every point I'm going to share with you here today. My wife doesn't even agree with me on everything, and she's married to me. You're not married to me, so I don't expect that out of you. We're going to talk about proven tools for effective evangelism. We're not here to reinvent the wheel in this presentation. This is the nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty, get started. If you've already held 25 public evangelistic meetings, I'm not expecting you to pick much up from this presentation. But I'm going to give you some proven tools for effective evangelism. The first one, get a proven series. Guys, when I got started trying to do evangelism, I got the late Ron Halverson stuff. In my opinion, he had the best stories. And I got the late C.D. Brooks' stuff. I thought he just had the best way of just putting it right there. And I got Steve Wahlberg stuff, and Steve DeLong stuff, and Leo Screven stuff, and Mark Finley stuff. It ended up being about 15 to 18 different evangelists, and I went through their entire programs. So I had the best verses. I had the best stories. I had the best little one-liners to slip in there. And I did evangelism, and it was okay. You know, this was back in 97, our first series, and we sent out some flyers, and we had some people come out, and we had a little series about 12 baptisms. It was pretty good, and next thing you know, the conference has given me a district, and I did some meetings then in 1999, and we had 137 baptisms in 99, while everybody was Y2K crazy. You remember that? Everybody was coming out, it was a time where people were interested. And that was nice, a little North Mississippi district with 137 baptisms. So the conference president said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I'm just pastor until you make me an evangelist." He said, "Okay, well, be the evangelist then." And so they made me the conference evangelist. And I continued to do meetings, and I was having some good success, but with Amazing Facts back then, and he was holding meetings, and even though sometimes he would start with about the same number of people that I did, he was baptizing a bunch more people. Throw it away. You don't really mean that. I'm just going to set it down gently. That whole drop the mic craze is not good for mics. And so I just really scratched my head at that. My father-in-law had been doing it for years, and maybe we'd both start with 100 people, and he would baptize back then 30, and I'd baptize 15. And I thought, what's the deal here? And he told me, he said, Hiram, I've been listening at your series, and it's not cohesive. You need to pick someone's series, and you need to do it like 8 to 10 times exactly the way they do it until you understand why it works. And then make your own stuff. So oftentimes I get Bible workers, they come out of Bible work school, they want to write their own Bible studies. You're not using your own Bible studies. You're going to use an established set of studies. And once you have done that, once you've done, 40, 50 Bible studies all the way through, and you've baptized people, if you want to start doing your own stuff, then you can. If you're not going to do at least 3 evangelistic meetings and you haven't already done at least about 10 or 12, you probably have no need to write your own evangelistic series. I took my father-in-law's, I literally photocopied them, put them in a Bible, used them word for word, and then when he told a personal story, I just said a friend of mine and told the same story. And my numbers went right up where his were. Immediately. And after a year and a half of being the evangelist for Texaco Conference, I then started making my own series. I understood what was working. I understood why it worked. I had seen it work. I know, one of the first things, proven tools for effective evangelism, great. All I need to do is go get a proven series. Well, I'll just do that. That's all I need. Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. You could get Boonstra's series, Bradshaw's series, Finley's, Wagley's. Kleindienst is here. He's got a series he just put together, and I've got it. I've looked at it. I think it's a good series, a great series if you want to get a full series and do it. But my first thing on evangelism is daunting. If you've got to write 20-something sermons to do an evangelistic series, and you haven't done one yet, no wonder you haven't. Get someone else's series and preach it a couple of times a year for a few years, then make your own if you want to. Quite frankly, if you're not going to do more than about 3 evangelistic meetings a year, I'm not sure you ever need to write your own series. And I'll tell you this, having done over 100 meetings myself, I've looked at Kleindienst's that he sent, and I think I'm going to use it for my next one. Why? Because there's something about going through someone else's stuff, the way they've done it, the way they've put it together, that you pick things up. And so one of the hardest things to get to ever doing your first series is writing it. Well, don't do that. You say, can I get your series, Hiram? No, you can't get my series because my series won't do you any good because I don't have enough notes. You would be welcome to my series, but I probably have about, on average presentation, about 15 slides and about 2 bullet points on each slide because I've done it so long that it's in here. But I did notice something. I'm not doing as many evangelistic meetings as a pastor now, and I'm remembering after I get done with the sermon that I've left important things out. So even me, if I'm not doing at least 3 a year, I'm not maintaining it up here. It may have to do with being in my later 40s now too. That may have something to do with it. But there's lots of series you can get, but you'll want one that has pretty good notes. Case in point, one of the things that I'd always do after I identified the papacy and Bible prophecy, the Vatican, is I would always remember to tell people, don't call up your Catholic grandmother after tonight's meeting and tell her what you learned here tonight. Now, whether it's their grandmother or their best friend, if folks hear something in the series and then go talk to their family and they're not versed in it, they don't know how to explain it, they're probably not going to have a positive experience, are they? But you know what? They get excited and they do that if you don't remember to tell them not to do it. And you can lose some people with leaving those little things out. So here's another thought for you on it. And when you get a proven series of meetings, there's a lot of things I could share with you about how making sure it's Christ-centered and praying and relying on the Holy Spirit. All of that is a very, very big part of it. And I'm assuming that, not just assuming, but hoping that by the time you get to the point of doing a series, you understand how important that is. but I want to emphasize it. Spending time in prayer, being Christ-centered. There's a difference between mentioning Jesus more often and being Christ-centered. They're not the same thing. I heard one evangelist, he was very popular years ago, and he talked about how Mark Finley had went through his series and told him it's a great series, but there's not enough Jesus there. So he decided to make his series Christ-centered, went through every sermon and made sure he mentioned Jesus more often. That's not Christ-centered. That's just mentioning Jesus more often. Christ-centered is making sure that Jesus is the center of the message. Okay? Now, as we move ahead here, you need to use a proven theme. I had an elder in a church I pastored years ago, and he was excited about doing public evangelism, but he didn't like my methods. That's fine. I realize that. You got as many opinions on methods as you do people that are going to do the series. That's fine. In fact, you've got more opinions than the people that are going to do the series, because there are going to be lots of people that are never going to do a series but are going to have lots of opinions. All right? And he goes, I'm not doing that prophecy stuff. They need to get to know Jesus. I'm doing a Come Meet Jesus series. And he had a beautiful brochure printed up, and it said, Come Meet Jesus, with Jesus' hands outstretched. And he sent out several thousand of those flyers. And this is back when flyers worked way better than they do now, when you could consistently get 4 and 5 people per 1,000 off the flyer. He sent out several thousand flyers, and he had 2 people show up. You know why? For whatever reason, as often as it resonates with me, let's just tell them to come meet Jesus, that doesn't draw a crowd. Maybe they felt like they could have already met Jesus at every church on the corner in town any week they wanted to. But for whatever reason, it doesn't draw a crowd. One of the things in my makeup as a drawn to evangelism, I'm a pastor now, but I want to know what works. Like, in the midst of getting ready for my own presentation, I wanted to stop and ask Tim Rosenberg out here, how is your flyer performing right now when you send it out in the mail? I haven't used Islam and Prophecy in a long time. I've used it before, back around terror attacks and stuff when it's big in the news. But how is it drawing? Because when it comes to advertising, I want a proven theme. What has been getting a crowd recently? What is working? I could care less if my brochure is pretty. I want 150 people to preach to opening night, and most of them not Adventist. So get with the printing companies, talk to the evangelists that do it all the time. What is working? What is working right now? Now, consistently over the years, Bible prophecy has worked. I've used lots of different themes. You say, I think we need to do more experimentation. Yes, but I'll tell you this. I think those that are doing it full time, or those who have been in a church and have already done lots of evangelism, that's probably where a lot of the experimentation should take place. Because if, let's say, you're pastoring in a district and you've been there 1 year and you talk your church members into finally doing an evangelistic meeting, and you experiment and you have 0 in the way of baptisms and what's considered success, you're going to struggle to get your church members on board to support you doing more evangelism. Do what works. Use proven series. Use proven advertising. You get to opening night of your meeting and you look out there and you got 2 visitors, you're in trouble. Because you're going to baptize 10, 15% of your opening night crowd? You get to opening night of your series and you got 2 visitors, you likely don't have a baptism in the crowd. You need to get a critical mass. So, get a proven series, use a proven theme. Now, you need enough proven advertising. So use a proven theme. I've kind of mixed those 2 up, so let me clarify them for you just briefly. Use a proven theme. I've used creation evolution before. I managed to draw a crowd. Right now, I can get more people with a creation evolution series to come out opening night than I can from Bible prophecy right now. part of that is most towns that would do evangelism, they've sent out prophecy handbills before. No one's ever seen a creation handbill the way that we do. The crowd comes out. Here's what I've noticed. You don't baptize near as many people, not as high a percentage. Okay? Now, the Lord gave me an idea of how to make it prophetic. Yes, sir. Don't baptize the highest percentage of those that come out. Yes, thank you for the clarification. Here's what I figured out after doing it many times. I did a full message series based on creation evolution, because everything that ends in Revelation starts in Genesis. Can you preach the clean and unclean foods from Genesis? Yes. Can you preach, you can even preach remnant church from Genesis when you start with the seed of the woman in Genesis 3, because then you go to Revelation 12 and that's showing up there again. It's all there. Can you preach state of the dead? Yeah, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, breathed in his nostrils the breath of life. Man became a living soul. You eat of the fruit, you'll surely die. You got all the starts of you can do the whole thing from right there. But every night you preach your creation evolution series, you're getting farther away from when it happened. Every night you preach your prophecy series, you're getting closer to final events. And so prophecy creates a framework in which people make decisions. When I discovered that the three angels' messages are an outline of the book of Genesis, and then I brought prophecy into my creation meetings, then we started getting decisions. A lot more decisions. You say, how do you figure that? Well, I'm off the reservation here a little bit, but just let me share this with you. You got the three angels' messages. In the first angel's message, you've got creation and the flood. Worship him that made heaven and earth. That's creation. The sea and the fountains of water. The word fountains, there is the same word in the Septuagint for the fountains of the deep that broke up at the flood. Okay. And then the second angel's message, Babylon has fallen. Going through Genesis, the next significant event after the flood is the Tower of Babel. And then after that, you have Abraham called out of the land of Ur of the Chaldeans. The land of Ur is in Babylon. Called out of Babylon. Abraham was called out of Babylon. And then, get this, the next significant event is destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. With what? Fire and brimstone. I'm quoting the three angels' messages now, in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Remember, pre-incarnate Christ, we call the Lamb, came and visited with Abraham and went to Sodom and Gomorrah. The third angel's message, you guys, are you with me? And so the three angels' messages are not just an outline of Genesis, but they are an outline of Genesis. So if you want to preach creation evolution, you certainly are going to have a better experience if you tie it in with prophecy. Prophecy tends to be the proven method that creates a framework in which people make decisions. Now, one of the drawbacks to public evangelism supposedly today is the cost of public evangelism. When I was still traveling in public evangelism, people, it's just too expensive to do this. Too expensive to do this. Well, back in 1957, a brand new 57 Chevy cost $2,757. And you know what? For $2,757, you could do a sure enough good Adventist evangelistic series in 1957. Well, today, 2024 Chevrolet Camaro is $32,495,000. We've always been able to do great evangelism for less than the cost of a high-end new vehicle. It's just cars cost more now. It's relative. Everything has gone up in price. Now, I picked the Chevy Camaro. You think I picked it because it's expensive? No, I picked it because it's actually one of the cheaper cars. Because in every Adventist church on Sabbath morning, there's brand new Chevy Tahoes that cost $70,000 in the parking lot. But we can't afford to do an evangelistic series. We just don't view souls and sacrifice the same as we once did. You can afford to do evangelism. Just pick out the price of a good, nice new car in your church parking lot and explain to your church that's what it costs to do a good evangelistic meeting. Everybody shows up in a car on Sabbath morning. It's not an issue. We just made it an issue. By the way, I'm going to compare it to Adventist education for a moment. I'm not down on Adventist education. All three of my kids are in Adventist schools. In fact, I'm only able to stay today here because I've got to fly home. I've got a daughter graduating Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska this coming weekend. And then 2 weeks from there, I've got another one graduating Sunnydale Adventist Academy. And my son is going to College Park Christian Academy, which is our local church school. So I'm not down on Adventist education. I think it's the best place for my kids to have the best opportunity to choose Jesus. I'm very much up on Adventist education. But let me tell you something. It's actually cheaper to win them as adults and keep them than it is to send them all the way to Adventist school. And you keep a higher percentage from the ones you win into the church, and we say, oh, well, we lose too many. It's not worth doing evangelism. Well, we don't say that about our schools. In evangelism, we're keeping 69% of those that are baptized. Are we keeping that many that go through our schools? The facts are we're not. I'm not down on the schools. I'm just saying we don't need to support the schools and then use the arguments that would just as much make sense about the schools against evangelism and not do evangelism. I see these ought you to have done and not to leave the other undone. Okay? So, as we look here, proven tools, let's get back to the tools. One of the things that was a big deal in the tools, and I've totally spaced on it at the very beginning today, is when I was learning to graft, I got invited to go learn from a master grafter. And when I showed up to graft with him that day, he pulled out a little velvet bag. I think it used to be for Crown Royal alcohol or something. But in that little velvet bag, he had his tools for grafting. And he pulled out his single bevel grafting knife. It means it only had a cutting blade on one side, a cutting edge on one side. And I looked at that knife, and he had sharpened it over the years so many times that it was very narrow. He had sharpened most of the knife away. And he had a whit rock that he sharpened it on in the bag with him. And the whit rock was worn to the knife, and the knife was worn to the whit rock. He said, if I tried to sharpen my knife on anything else, it would take a long time. It wouldn't work good because this knife and this whit rock go together. And I knew, boy, I'm going to learn some good grafting stuff. And after one session with that man, I went from about half my grafts taking to 100% of my grafts taking on my pear tree. And so having the right tool, just getting the grafting knife and understanding how to use it made a huge difference for me. So as we move ahead, proven tools for effective evangelism. Consider a haul. Guys, I realize that some interest will come to our church, and we want to say, well, the best interest will come to the church. Okay. Are you wanting to win the worst of the worst? Are you wanting to win the people that wouldn't go to a church? You're not going to win them in the church. Case in point, we did a series in Deming, New Mexico years ago. Young lady showed up, opening night of the series, came walking in, all dressed in black, covered in black tattoos. That was actually something back then. That's not that big a deal now. The world has changed. Okay? And she had 666 tattooed right here on her right hand. And she came in and she sat on about the third row and just stared a hole in me all night. Left. The next night, I was in the lobby as she came into the public hall. And she said, I didn't appreciate you telling everybody to keep looking up the verses in the Bible. I've never opened a Bible. I'm only here because I want to learn about 666. I was dedicated to Satan at birth, and I already have it tattooed on my right hand. Well, you want to learn about 666? That's why you're here. She said, yeah. I said, you know the only place you're going to learn about 666? She says, where? I said, the Bible. In fact, and I picked the Bible up off the table and I opened it to Revelation 13 and I literally put it in her hands and pulled my hand away. Instead of it falling on the floor, she held on to it. She came in and sat down, and about halfway through the Daniel 2 message that night, intentionally for the first time in her life, she opened a Bible. By the end of that series, she had decided to give her heart. Well, she gave her heart to Jesus after just a few nights. Went from everything being head to toe black, everything head to toe red, bright red. Well, that's probably a good direction. All right. Well, by the end of the series, she wanted to bring to me, they teach in Satan worship that you can't get out of it, that it'll always stay with you, that if you give the stuff away, it'll come back to you. And so she says, I've got a statue that I used to use to worship Satan. Can I bring it to you? And I'm thinking, why? She said, well, I'm told that if we give it away, it'll come back. I mean, people give stuff away and they find it in their closet again. And you being a man of God, if I bring it to you, I can get rid of it. So she brought it. I said, okay, bring it. Don't bring it in the church. So after the meeting one night, me and Pastor Sven Franson, he pastors in Olympia, Washington now, we went out front and she brought us the statue and her stash of weed and her tarot cards, because she had been able to predict the future with tarot cards. She'd been into all this stuff. And right there on the steps of the church, we tore the tarot cards up. We broke the demon statue into pieces and told her to go home and flush her own bag of weed, because as Adventist pastors, we weren't driving down the road with it and we weren't taking it in the truck or in the church. Wasn't going to happen. You can go flush your own weed. It won't come back up once you flush it. It'll be gone. And so we tore up the tarot cards and broke the demon. It ended up scratching the concrete on the church steps with that devil statue as we broke it to pieces. Pastor thought that was pretty cool, I guess. And then she came to visit with us, made a decision to be baptized and join the church. And she said, Pastor, I've got a question. I know you talked in questions and answers about tattoos and not to print marks on your body, and you read that in the Bible, but you think it would be all right if I got one more? And I'm thinking to myself, don't you have enough? I mean, she had them everywhere visible. And she said, I've got this 666 tattooed on my right hand. I want to go get like a puppy paw or something put over the 666. You think that would be all right? And I must confess, as an Adventist pastor, I said, now I'm not the one, we're not Catholic priests. We can't tell you what's okay and not okay. But if I had 666 tattooed on my hand, I think I would go have something put over it. So I gave her my blessing to go get one more tattoo. Guess what? We wouldn't have had that experience starting in a church. She wouldn't have walked through the doors. She came to a public hall. You can start your meetings in a church if you want to, but you won't win those people in the church. I love Pastor Roger Walter to death, a pastor of this church. And when I did meetings with him in Colorado, they didn't have a church building. And so they started their meetings in halls. He does his meetings here in a church. Now, still wins a lot of people. But when we were in Colorado, we had a guy come out that Roger wouldn't win here until he, gets a public hall. I razz him about it all the time. In fact, last time I came here and did a series for him, I tried to get him to do a public hall, and the maddest I've ever seen him get, I pranked him. I found we had talked about a hall, and so I said, I know you want to do it and reach more people, Roger, but you're getting pressure, locally to just do it in the church with everything that's going on in the calendar. And so I went ahead and booked the hall, and here's the handbill. I sent it to press today. And I had the handbill company make a fake handbill with us starting in the hall. And I emailed it to him. He was ready to cancel the meeting and cancel me it was a prank. We held the meetings here. I think we had 40-something baptisms right here in this room. It was great series. But when I was working with him in Colorado, they didn't have a church to start in. And so everything had to start in a public hall. And we were in a theater, not a movie theater, but an acting theater with a big stage, Phelps Theater, I believe, there in one of those towns in Colorado. And this fella came, and he was coming every night. When it was a large series in a smaller venue, so we had 2 sessions a night. So he would come, and his wife would come to the second one because they had a little boy who's now a grown man, but at the time, they couldn't get him to stay in the children's program. So he would come to the first session, and his wife would keep the kid, and then his wife would come to the second session, and he would keep the kid. And we get up to the Sabbath topic, and we invite them to church, and they didn't come. So that night, Saturday night, I get to the hall, he comes in, I'm visiting, I'm like, Aaron, I missed you at church on Sabbath morning. I missed you at church this morning. What's up? He goes, oh, we just had so much going on, way too busy, couldn't make it. It's okay. Well, next session, his wife comes in. I said, Stacy, we missed y'all at church this morning. She goes, yeah, Aaron just didn't want to come. We didn't have anything going on. We didn't do anything. We just sat at home. The next time Monday night or whatever, when we had a meeting, Aaron comes in, I'm like, dude, man, your wife spilled the beans on you. One of the things I've learned as an evangelist, you're leaving town in a few weeks. You don't have time to you might as well confront issues as they come up because you don't have 2 years to do it. I said, bro, your wife spilled the beans on you. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you told me, and I repeated to him back what he had said. Y'all were too busy. Your wife said you just didn't want to come. Y'all weren't doing nothing. I'm like, so what gives? Oh, his shoulders just sagged. He said, Pastor, I can't go in a church building. You get that? I can't go in a church building. He's come into the meetings. We're in a hall. I said, what do you mean you can't go in a church building? He goes, Pastor, I own a bar. Right. So he goes, you don't understand, Pastor. As his head hung in shame, it's a topless bar. I'm like, dude, you own a strip club? Yeah. You won't come to the church? No, I'm not going to go to the church. Isn't that interesting? Now, it just so happened Pastor Walter didn't have a church at that time. So even when we got halfway through the series, we still had to keep meeting in a hall. In that case, we ended up having to transfer to an Adventist school, but he would go in a school, but he wouldn't go in a church. So he kept coming to the meetings. Now, lo and behold, he decided to get out of all of that. And as he made that decision, 2 days later, his dad died. His dad was part owner in it, and it went into probate. Have you ever dealt with property in probate? Can you change a thing? Can you close it? No. And his dad was married to one of the strippers that used to work for them. And him and his brothers were all in the business, and they were all married to ladies that had been involved in the business. And everybody wanted their piece of everything, and lawsuits ensued. 5 years later, he came walking up behind me in Springfield, Missouri, where I was then pastor, and tapped me on the shoulder while I was making announcements. He'd worked with my elders. He had finally gotten out of that business, got out of probate, sold the building to be a Christian outreach center. It ended up shutting down the only such establishment in that county in Colorado. And he gave me a key to the building, which was no longer that kind of building, as a trophy for the gospel. And then I had the privilege of baptizing him. Oh, Roger's got his key up there. Yes, we're in the key club, Roger and I. Roger was given a key as well. The other man standing in the baptistry is his half-brother, Michael Aim, and who's now an Adventist pastor. His mother was an Adventist, and quite an amazing story to hear from Michael. Michael found out he had been wanting to reach his dad and brothers who were still in this business, and Michael had since left and was trying to follow the Lord and wanted to share with his family, and he heard his brother was coming to this Creation Evolution series. And then he got concerned, and then we transferred it into the prophecy series. We used to do that for just a weekend and invite him to a prophecy series. And then he was worried that his brother, who was into all this stuff, was now maybe starting to attend something with the wrong church in his mind. But anyway, it ended up being quite an interesting story. Now, moving on here. So get a proven series, use a proven theme. Do enough proven advertising to get a crowd. Consider a hall. Churches work, guys, and that's awesome, but certainly consider a hall. You will be able to potentially reach some people that won't walk through the doors of a church. And those are some of the funnest to reach. And you need to do a full message series. Guys, I know that some of our popular speakers do these weekend events now, and I travel and do weekend events. I think weekend events can be good as pre-work events. But let's not consider them evangelism. No one's deciding to keep the Sabbath and join the church at the end of one weekend event. And so when we spend our evangelism money for this year on that, but then those people don't have opportunity to go on and study through the doctrines, we're coming up short. You need a full message series, one that covers the three angels' messages, one where they understand the difference between Sabbath and Sunday in Scripture, the state of the dead, hellfire, and other important things as we believe them. Ultimately, it is not the information that's going to be the biggest issue in people's lives. The information is important. It's their commitment to Jesus, number one. Number two, they need to plug into a church family where they're going to continue to grow and learn. But you can't get people to make decisions on information they don't have. They need the information to be able to decide to keep Sabbath. I have a pastor that preceded me in the district where I'm at, a wonderful man that has some strengths that are my weaknesses. And I wish dearly that, and I'm trying to improve in some of the areas where he was so good. He was a pastor that did great in the community. You know, he had Celebrate Recovery going on. He had the church full doing community outreach, doing compassion ministry stuff. He filled the church up. But again, Matthew 23 principle, these ought you to have done and not to leave the other undone. He goes on and does ministry somewhere else. 3 years later, there's no one in the church from his time of ministry there that was one from the community. And I've never seen anyone gather more people up. You know why? Because he did compassion ministry, but he didn't preach the distinctive doctrines. And if people can attend an Adventist church for a year and not be convicted that Saturday is the Sabbath, that's just where their friends are that help them out. But you have every opportunity to teach them what the Bible says. And so these ought you to have, I'm not down on compassion ministry. It's a weakness of mine. And you gotta, brother, remind me your name. You're talking about it today, aren't you? Daniel. I listened to him present at the boot camp last year and talk about compassion ministries. I'm hoping he'll give me some more tips and pointers and help me do better in it. But I'm going to add, you need to do both. And Daniel's one that believes that. He believes in getting the attention of the community, gathering them up through compassion ministry, and then preaching the full message to them. You need the full message. The next one, this is one that the world has changed, at least in certain circles, maybe certain ethnic circles, I don't know, certainly circles I've worked in, toward visitation. 75 years ago, if you showed up at someone's house as a minister, you were welcome. You're not always welcome at people's home these days. Have you noticed that? Even as a pastor with regular attending church members, you can try for weeks to get a visit scheduled with some of those folks. So visitation, the way I was taught, is you do an evangelistic series, people are coming out, they miss a couple of nights, you drop by their house. Even if they don't miss a couple of nights, you drop by their house. You know what I discovered by dropping by people's house? There were people that hadn't missed a single night. I show up at their house, I never see them again. They think he's after me. The world has changed in regards to visitation. And I know there's inspired counsel on it. The world has changed in regards to visitation. I think it's still very, very important. But I'm going to tell you what. If somebody misses a night, I've experimented with it. 3 things. If people miss the seminar, you can show up at their house and give them the handouts they missed. You can put them in a plastic bag and hang them on their door, which still says, they were here at my house. Where are they? Or you can call them on the phone and let them know that you missed them and you have the handouts waiting for them when they come back. And I've tested the methods, and which ones do you think did the best at getting people back to the meetings? The phone call. Hands down. Now, not just a phone call from anybody. I had an evangelist that heard what I was doing, and he goes, oh, I want to try that too. So he had the pastor call. Thing is, the pastor wasn't preaching the meetings. So they didn't have the connection with the pastor. It didn't work. a phone call. Now, technology helps us. People have cell phones these days that you can just send a message to. I use a program called Sly Broadcast, where you can record a message and send it to a bunch of people. It just shows, have you ever had a message show up on your cell phone and you didn't get a missed call, but there's a message there and you go, I guess so-and-so called. Yeah, it does that. I had a church member years ago where I pastored, and the Lord loves her dearly, and I did my best to. But she would call all the time, and I could not get off the phone. I know you've probably never had anybody like that in one of your churches. And I came across something called Sly Dial, where you can record a message. And for 10 cents back then, you could send the message to their cell phone. And I started doing that. She would call, I'd let it go to voicemail, but I couldn't not respond as the pastor. But if I called her back, I had to have 30 to 45 minutes to spend. And I didn't have it most of the time, nor did I want it, honestly. And so I used Sly Dial, and I recorded the message. Her name wasn't Betty, but let's just say it was. Hey, Sister Betty, looks like I'm not going to be able to connect with you by phone today, but I just wanted to get back with you by message here and let you know that I'll be thinking of what you said and da-da-da-da-da-da. Click send. She gets a voicemail delivered to her phone. It never rings. Yes, sir. Question over here? Sly Dial for individual calls, Sly Broadcast if you want to do a bunch of them. Now what I do when people miss 2 nights in a row on my evangelistic meetings, it prints out, I get all their phone numbers and I highlight them and I drop them into Sly Broadcast and I record a message. Instead of saying, hi, Tom, it just says hi. You know, if you leave a message on someone's phone, they're assuming you're calling them. I'm not saying anything dishonest. I'm just using technology to make my time go better. So I got 30 people that need contact and it just says, hey, this is Hiram with the Prophecy Seminar. I just noticed we missed you the last night or so and wanted to reach out and let you know that we care. We hope you're doing okay, that you're not sick or needing a ride or anything. We've saved the night handouts for you for the nights you've missed. And tomorrow night we're covering this and this, and the next night we're covering this and this. Hope to see you. Bye. And then I send that to my 30 people. You say, well, that's not the same thing as calling them. Another thing I experimented on, and I kept numbers on this for years, is calling people on the phone, which now most people will not answer a number they don't know. You're going to have to leave a message anyway, versus people that I went to voicemail and left a message. And I found out they were just as likely to come back to the seminar if I left them a message than talk to them personally. And so now I have extra family time. Instead of calling all 30 of those folks, I just send the message to each one of them. So is that cheating a little bit? I don't know. It kind of feels like it, but boy, it works. So it's a hack. Okay. All right. Is that the word? All right. So use phone and text messages. I'm going to tell you something's breaking down in evangelism right now. This is breaking down. Something's changing. And I don't have it figured out yet. And that is, when people would make decisions to be baptized and join the church, I would call them and set up a visit. They don't answer their phones anymore. Like in the last 10, 12 years, this has changed. I've tried texting them about visits. It's not as effective as a personal conversation. I have now switched in my meetings to visiting before and after the series, and we do 2 topics a night with refreshments in between, so we have them there for more time to intermingle. I set my visits up in person because I can't hardly get them on the phone. Now, I know one evangelist, he just blocks his number and calls over and over and over and over and over and over till they answer. Maybe that's the solution. It works for him. It's just, I'm not there. Okay. So use the phone and text messages, but don't try to set, that's for inviting folks back. That's not working so good for setting up visits now for folks that may be on the fence. Doesn't work as good. All right. Have your guests read the Bible. Guys, I can't overemphasize this one. I recommended using a proven program, but one thing I would deviate from the proven programs that you're going to get is they have every verse on the screen, most of them. I think there's value in people opening the Bible and reading it for themselves. I use supporting text on the screen. I do. But opening night, when I preach Matthew 24, I don't put a single verse from Matthew 24 on the screen. I get them all to Matthew 24, and we read all of Matthew 24 out of the Bible. I might put up a verse out of Daniel or Revelation then on the screen, but we read all of our Matthew 24 out of the Bible. I just feel like there's something psychological going on there for folks to actually read out of the Word of God themselves, because they're going to be assailed with issues later. Did I really see it? And having opened the Bible and read it in the Bible, to me, makes a difference. So when I preach on Daniel 2, I will put supporting text on the screen, but I don't put a single verse from Daniel 2 on the screen, because we're all going to turn to Daniel 2. I mean, if it takes them 5 minutes to find it, well, just stay in Daniel 2. Put your supporting text on the screen. Have people read in the Bible. Have them get in the Word of God. Don't put everything on the screen. That's just, that's a personal thing for me. And here's another one for you. We're going to talk about this tonight. Call for decisions. What we've been given is not just informational, it's transformational. Now, there's a psychological principle that explains that for you to get someone to make a decision, they have to have the information needed to make the decision. Okay, that's understood. But ultimately, the Sabbath truth isn't Saturday is the Sabbath, not Sunday. That's just a fact. That's not the Sabbath truth. The Sabbath truth embodies, what does this say about who our God is? What does it say about the God of relationships? Okay? So don't just deliver the information. You've got to constantly be calling for decisions. And so I believe so much that we always need to constantly be calling for decisions that, well, now I need to call for a decision. What are you going to do? One of the things I didn't grow up Adventist. I grew up in a Baptist church. Went through the windshield of a car face first at the age of 16, and through some providential events, 3 years later was baptized into the Adventist church. Studied my way in. At the age of 16, I wasn't the least bit spiritually interested, but after almost dying, it was a wake-up call. My family ended up going to a Bible prophecy seminar with amazing facts that we wouldn't have heard about without that accident. It was a providential thing, I believe. And I wouldn't be here today, I wouldn't be on the path I am in life if there weren't Adventist pastors that believed in evangelism. I lived 30 minutes away from the closest Adventist church. We only found out about it, not from a handbill, one 30-second radio spot. On a radio station my dad didn't listen to. I had to wreck his car to get him in the car with someone else to hear it. And I'm here today because Adventist pastors believed in doing public evangelism. We're here at this conference to learn. But in the Adventist church, I still have an outsider looking in perspective. I never feel like a real Adventist. I was raised a Baptist. I always feel like an outsider looking in. I certainly see cultural Adventism issues. I certainly did when I went to Adventist college. We tend to be overeducated and underexperienced. The reality is every single one of you pastors here has enough to go do a series in the next year. Go get Mark Finley's and preach it. Go get whoever's and preach it. I'm going to ask you, will you get a series on the calendar? That's my question for you. I don't believe we ought to present without asking for a decision. So that's the decision I'm asking for today. You say, well, I don't know when I'll do it. Get it on the calendar. One of the things I've discovered about putting stuff on the calendar is it always ends up getting here way quicker than I thought it would. So just get it on the calendar. Question for you today: will you get you a series on the calendar? I'm not going to ask you to stand or raise your hands, but I'm going to ask you to make that decision right where you sit right now.
It's time for some reflection. I know I sound like a broken record. If you've heard more than one of these episodes, you've heard it over and over again. Reflection practice is so powerful. And that's why we emphasize it at the Propel conference. So right now, I want to invite you to stop for a moment and think about what Dr. Rester shared and how these ideas could be applied in your own ministry. Specifically, what was the big idea for you? How will you apply that big idea in your own ministry context? What are you inspired to do? And when this episode finishes, I encourage you to pause for 5 or 10 or even 15 minutes and just let your mind wander. Just reflect on what you've heard. This reflection time can be really powerful. Well, that's it for this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@propelconference.org. And please mark your calendar for next year's Propel Conference coming to Tacoma, Washington, April 27 to 30, 2025. Special thanks to Dr. Hiram Rester for speaking at the 2024 Propel Conference and to E-Adventist for sponsoring this episode. This has been the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. The Propel Podcast is produced by the crew at Sermon View, and the event recording services were provided by Adventist Learning Community. I'm Larry Witzel, wishing you God's richest blessing in your evangelistic journey. Please join us again next time for another episode of the Propel Podcast.